So the shock load on a climbing system is a result of three things. One is the dynamic characteristics of your rope. Okay, so this would be the typical kern mantle rope that we've all grown to know and love. And, you know, most of us just see the outer colorful sheath and can feel the pliability of the rope. And then if we look at the end, we'll see that white tip. There's where the inner core is, sort of thing. But if we were to tear away the outer sheath, we'd see something like this. And it's just a number of smaller ropes inside that outer sheath. The fall factor. All right, so to calculate a fall factor, it's a simple enough thing, is we just divide the length of the fall by the length of rope out, okay? And what I mean by that is, let's say Leroy here. And he's there, and his buddy's climbing. Fred is way up here, right? And he's climbing up. And the distance here is 100 feet. Okay, so this is where it can get confusing, is because you think, oh well, if you're going to calculate a fall factor, there's 100 feet of rope out, he can only fall 100 feet. But let's take a worst case scenario where he's on a multi-pitch climb, and he can actually fall past the belayer. So if he has no gear in here, there's no intermediate pieces of equipment, he could potentially fall the 100 feet to the belayer, and then bang, another 100 feet below that. And so in that case we would be doing something like the length of the fall would be 200 feet. Length of the rope out would be 100 feet, and we would get a worst case scenario of a fall factor 2 when we divide the length of rope into the length of fall. And that's as bad as it can get. Now when they're, you know, fortunately it's very hard to produce a fall factor 2 unless you come right off with a belay, and that's the potential here. It's like where it can quite often happen is when a climber first leaves the belay and he just climbs up and he doesn't put any gear in, then he falls and he may only be 10 feet above the belay, or even 5 feet for that matter, and he falls without having any gear in. It's the same situation. So it's, you know, 10 feet, well, he doesn't have any gear in, so he can fall 10 feet to the belay, 20 feet divided by 10 feet of rope out still equals a fall factor 2. And it's still a fall factor 2. Doesn't matter about the distance, because you have very little rope out, then you have very little stretch, and so it acts more like a cable as opposed to you know, the elastic band that we all depend on to reduce the forces on the climber and the belayer and the anchor and the gear. Okay? And oh yeah, the weight of the climber. Those three things will determine how much shock is going to hit your system. All right. Now, the more rope that we have out, the more gradual the energy can be absorbed. For example, if we have 10 feet of rope out, then we'll get a maximum stretch of 1 foot. Whereas if we have 100 feet of rope out, then we'll have a maximum stretch of 10 feet, and that energy can be absorbed over that 10-foot span. So it's not to be underestimated when you're moving right off of the belay, you know, and you don't have a piece of gear in, whether it's 5 feet or 10 feet, and you fall past that, that's still a fall factor 2, right? And you're landing and you're going to hit that anchor and your belayer with a huge amount of force. Whereas, you know, if you go up and you're climbing up and you put intermediate pieces of gear, you're reducing that fall factor and you're changing the whole dynamics of the system. For ropes that I don't use a ton, I have this, I mean, I still have to take care of them and stuff. I have this dry bag that I have in my store area. And I'll carry my specialty ropes, things like, you know, the twin ropes that I use for ice climbing or alpine mountaineering, like I do that anymore. 70 meter, you know, lead rope that I haven't had used for a while. Oh, there's my 11 mil short roping rope. It's like 11.5 mil. It just feels good in your hand. And I'll have, you know, I have this Glacier 35, 40 meter ice floss that if I'm just going on easy glacier travel and I'm not too worried about generating lots of force. Here's a heli-ski. Well, over this way, if we come over here, these are the active ropes that I have that I'm using all the time. And they're hanging up, you know, so I can just come down and grab one. Here's a lead rope 10.5 or 10.2.